My dear friends, it's good to see you. We have a temporary solution while we fundraise to be able to do our streams. But please do go to the link and help us fix our problem with our bricked laptop, which we desperately need to be able to continue the new show and these streams and these lectures. It would be a huge help, more than a help. It's not possible without it. So please go to the link I've got in the chat there to support us, to support me. Yeah, let's go straight into the lecture though. The Beatitudes, part 2, lecture 2. But let's go over the Beatitudes though, generally, and how earth-shattering they are as a counter, as the serpent promised, the serpents and the fall promised, you will be as gods. Gods, plural, self-referential gods, bootstrapped gods, disconnected from God. And how does the serpent operate? He keeps his promises in his deceptive way, offering you the senses, the surface world, evolutionary grinding, and the will to power as a self-referential thing, which is what the Uberman is what the Ubermensch is. But under that holds a deep delusion of someone who ends up being provoked by the serpent, a fake freedom, a freedom from God, you're free to do as we tell you. You're free to do as we tell you. It's kind of like liberalism. You're free to do as we tell you. Unless you're not liberal, if you're not liberal, well, you're in prison if you're a threat to them. So, what is the Sermon on the Mount? It is the earth-shattering ingression. It is the total counter. It's the kingdom of heaven coming to earth. It's the way of the prodigal son and his return to father instead of the evolutionary grinding to end up at the Uberman, to end up at AI, to end up at the incarnation of Satan. That's what the Beatitude is. It's finally, after all that time with the preparation for the coming of Christ, the good news, the sigh of relief, even all of nature being merely a derivative of man's decadence. Finally, all of nature cried out for all that time until Christ came to be redeemed in its grinding pain of the war of all against all. Finally, he came. Thank God. Thank Jesus Christ for that. And so we know not only was it about the emergence of that Eastern humanistic contemplation, the discovery of the archetype, not only about that and resisting evolution through that, not only was it the dualistic Zarathustrian idea of fighting evil on earth through obeying revelation, infacticity, right? Because those are opposite. They fought on earth that yet rejected the ascent, whereas the Indians rejected their earth, rejected the earth to go to the place of peace, rejected the mission, the original first love that is what we're supposed to do here. The Christian, though, the Christian difference is in this work of salvation beyond those things, proclaimed that the kingdom of God had come into the realm of destiny of humanity. A voice was raised on earth that showed that. And this stands in complete contrast with natural evolution. It promises freedom in God, not the false freedom to be as God. And the Sermon on the Mount is not merely concerned with the humanistic beings preserving their true nature in the face of natural evolution, sort of through understanding through the symbolic, nor even with them simply obeying divinely revealed law in the world of the surface sense against evil, which could be considered dogma, but that in accordance with their archetype, again, archetype is a sort of Platonic word, in accordance with Jesus, the new Adam, the being of Jesus, the image and likeness of God, they became as God. Beyond just the image of God, because Jesus is a being. Be ye perfect, therefore, as thy Father in heaven is perfect, and the only way to the Father is through the Son. Those who came before me or reach before me are thieves and robbers. And that's also reaching before him, to take command from below, using these forces of natural selection, these forces of the serpent. That's reaching before him, as all these other religions do. And so the central statement from the Sermon of the Mount is a call to ascend from the kingdoms of nature and the human being and the humanistic and the image and likeness of God and the unconscious and the microcosm to, really you could think about it as a synthesis of both of them, the kingdom of God, the essence of both, the subject and the object. It summarizes the essence of the Sermon of the Mount and at the same time signifies the motto of the new development, the new evolution, the returning of the Son to the Father in the prodigal son story. The motto of the old evolution is ye shall be as gods, but without God. And again, in the plural there is important. Plural meaning, well, that's what's going to happen. A lot of people, as Seraphim Rose talked about, the orthodoxy and the religion of the future, there will be spiritual experience, Luciferic spiritual experience, but it will be gods in the sense of self-referential subjectivity, not objective truth. That's when it's going to come about through hallucinogenic drugs, AI as a prophet, and also the will to power practices of dark occultism or Eastern occultism, meaning the fleeing upward like the winged serpent. And to this, the Sermon on the Mount opposes its own motto and reveals the path leading to the very summit of the promise ye shall be as God, in with God. Theosis, at one-ment with God. The serpent promised a state of self-sufficiency, obviating any need for a God on high, implying that the knowledge and power of human beings in such a state will suffice completely. They will be rich. Rich, and how much is that true now? Rich in entertainments, rich in distractions, rich in your magic carpet of capital. And in contrast to this, the first beatitude of the Sermon of the Mount proclaims, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And as we talked about last week, the whole thing that is related to that is what we do is withdraw from the distractions of the world and the serpent, from the false gods of existence, to disclose he who is the one true God of essence. Theirs is the kingdom of heaven, and blessed are those who regard as poor any knowledge of power without God, that is, any knowledge of power or power not of God himself. They shall participate in the divine being, creative work of God. And so that sort of summarizes what the sermon, the impact of the Sermon of the Mount was. But we've already gone through the first three Beatitudes last lecture. And now we'll go into the fourth one. And these middle Beatitudes are about the transformation of soul that occurs from the first three, from being poor in spirit, from being meek, and the practices of the three O's that are related to that, of poverty, obedience, and chastity, as we've talked about many times before. And and this is sort of maps the transformation of that. And so the second group of the three Beatitudes might be referred to as psychosophical, since they deal mainly with the changes in human souls as they pass through the stages of evolution, or the prodigal son returning to the father. As you say evolution, but development is a better way of putting it, to separate it from natural selection. Connected with the first three verses, the last three verses could be called destinic or karmic, since they address what happens in the object, what happens in the macrocosm, due to the things that happen in the three first Beatitudes and the three middle ones. It's brought about by attaining those three stages of development towards God, rather than evolutionary grinding. Until these 9 verses have been studied as a whole, and become the subject of profound perceptive knowledge, one can't grasp, comprehend the essential structure of future humans, of where we'll be. Because, of course, we talk a lot about the apocalypse, but Christ wins in the end. Of future humanity who will become at one-ment with Christ and his impulses. Human beings will then be able to see most clearly the anti-Christian archetype of the ninefold human being, the incarnation of Satan, which AI is related to. Created expressly as the opposite of what we're supposed to be, of the opposite of Theosis is what's coming. It will masquerade itself as the new religion, though. It'll masquerade itself through, again, prophetizing hallucinogenic drugs, which you see people like Peterson promoting, and Eastern practices infiltrating, as we saw with the Summer of Love, into the West. And so what they'll be is the subconscious animalistic, rather than the superconscious, rather than the transcendent unconscious. What does this beatitude mean by hunger, thirst, and filled in connection with the soul? In ordinary experience, quenching one's thirst and satisfying one's hunger present a polarity. By quenching thirst, we quench the superabundant fire. When we drink water, we quench the superabundant fire of metabolic activity in the body. But when you still your hunger by eating things, bring fuel to the fire. It brings fuel to the fire. That's the difference. You heat up. You don't cool down. In one case, we put out the fire. In the other, we feed it. That's a useful metaphor for talking about the soul, which is what we're describing here. These 3 middle Beatitudes are about the soul and the soul's transformation. And so, however, when the body feels neither hunger nor thirst, a balance for these polarities is achieved. A physical harmony is established in the body. Physical harmony. That's harmony is what is described by righteousness in terms of soul. And so a similar polarity is present in the experience of the human soul. It consists of 1, impressions flowing into the soul from the outer environment, filling it with sensations and images on one hand, and on the other, the current is met within by the flow of our soul's inner demands or cherished expectations on the world. Those 2 things. And so a soul thirst is if those impressions supplied to the soul from the world remain unsatisfying. The inner flame of desire is then felt more sharply. Like if you don't quench your thirst, it's felt more sharply. That inner flame. Like water is supposed to quench that inner flame because of a lack of satisfaction. And that's how you speak of the soul's thirst. A soul hunger, on the other hand, is a hunger of soul arising when the world brings no new impressions to stimulate the soul, so that it longs less and less for the world and instead concentrates on its own inner life. When deeper moral claims, expectations, and yearnings of soul come into question, though, the soul experiences equilibrium between its inner claim on the world and the current flowing inward from outside as righteousness. If the soul's organization is preeminently moral, and you have to, of course, go through this process for that to come about, because we almost live in a state of abstract soul, not even consciousness soul, but abstractness, ripped apart, thinking, feeling, and willing ripped apart. And so that almost has to be brought back together by the concentration without effort, by the attending of the all and middle of and Jesus in the Jesus prayer, the attending of the breath in the Jesus prayer brings those things back together, thinking, feeling, and willing. And so the relationship between inner impulse and outer reality becomes a question of righteousness and the harmony of it. The soul's persistent alternating hunger and thirst then become hungering and thirsting after righteousness. Since righteousness is, and this is something that's deep, deep in our soul nature. And you see this with, of course, all the protests that are happening right now. People are whipped up into the deep anger based on their sense of, or even a misguided righteousness because they're not connected to the Lord. You have to have Christ enter a certain part of your soul to have a true valuation of things. And this is, it speaks to a Heideggerian care, this righteousness. It comes from, firstly, a properly grounded value hierarchy, which is part of soul, the feeling soul. But we'll get into that. And so it can be manipulated, and propaganda manipulates this sense of righteousness. But no temporal solution can ever satisfy this righteousness. No temporal thing, no liberalism, no communism, no mustache manism can satisfy this. No modern theory, no distribution of income can satisfy. There's temporal justice can help, but it's beyond that. And so righteousness is a condition of moral harmony in the feeling soul. And I think I was articulating that then, just as the satisfaction of hunger and thirst in the physical body state is a state of natural harmony. The human being is a thinking, feeling, and willing being. Heart, head, and limbs. A soul can also be divided into these. Again, as constituents, though, just for helpful purposes. Existentials, as Heidegger might have called them. These are things that can't be just divided out, but it helps to understand. We all get a sense that we're thinking, feeling, and willing beings. Heart, head, and limbs. We wouldn't have arms if it wasn't for a will to grasp. That's what's primordial. Its physicality is actually, it's not from the arms to the will. It's from the will, primordial will, to the arms, to the head, to the body and limbs. The same goes for thinking and feeling. So our soul can be, you can divide it into those three things. The feeling soul, or what's called in Christian esotericism the sentient soul, feeling soul, the heart soul, the willing soul, or the consciousness soul. But just think of it as the willing soul, the limb soul, the thinking soul, or the rational soul, the head soul. Again, like I said, consider them existentials, constituents, not parts. Yeah. Now, what we're fundamentally dealing with this beatitude and this righteousness is the feeling. Soul, for the Greeks, that was outside. For the Greeks, primordial concepts, that was the development of this part of the soul was important in Greek times, and when metaphysics first emerges. Their concepts are outside, close to that outside being. They're not. The feeling isn't brought inside; it's outside there. The beings aren't. It's not the macrocosm, isn't, and the subjectness of what we are, being subject and object, wasn't how it was then. It was felt outside with the facts of experience, conceptually, but also as feeling. So, this feeling, soul, righteousness, and harmony is what we're talking about. The sentient soul living externally in perceptual impressions as it does now. It's part of how the world presences to us. Again, you can compare it to Heideggerian care. The value, your hierarchy of value, you could call it, of things you care about are deeply imprinted on your soul. And the things that stick out for you, or what you value, sticks out for you. It makes the world presence as it does to you, this sentient soul. And so that's a good way of understanding it. And so it lives externally and in perceptual impressions, and inwardly through expressions of longing for perceptions. Because you long for something because you value it, right? It's morally just as dependent on righteousness as the body is on food and drink. So when things go wrong or right, there's a big upset. The sentient soul is the member of the whole human soul nature that expresses the condition of the complete soul. Cognitions of the consciousness, the willing soul, and the judgments of the rational soul do not alter the soul life until they become living sensations imbued with way and life, good and beautiful. So there's no change on the care, the value hierarchy that you have in your unconscious, you could call it. There's no alteration of that until this whole ripped apart being that we are, because of the abstractness of what we've become, you can't change it until really Christ has properly entered all of it. And so the sentient soul, the feeling soul, is the expression of the way the human soul is adjusted to life as it's come up. It is the makeup of the sentient soul that shows whether one is harmoniously adjusted to life. And like I said, it could be compared to the Heideggerian, who's a philosopher, care, our value hierarchy, what we care about fundamentally in the depth of our being. Valuative being with the world. Consequently, righteousness is not just the moral element of the sentient soul, but also the actual life expression of the whole moral structure of the soul. The measure of righteousness that you feel the human being expresses in relation to the world more as demands on the self than on the world is the criterion, not so much of what one wishes to become morally, but certainty of what one has already become. So it's about the past and the present for us, without Christ anyway. Rather than, also, it's not so much connected with your concern or your for the sake of what you have planned or what your future is going to be, but it's more about what you've become, your sense of righteousness and your past. It's not tied up with the future, who is, of course, as we know, it's Christ. The future is Christ, the true future. That righteousness expresses the total of one's whole moral condition. Righteousness expresses the total of one's whole moral condition. It has been known from the earliest times and was taught in the mystery schools and in the philosophy schools. It is the harmony of past and present. And so now let's look to Plato to get a sense of what it was and what it now becomes because of Christ and the kingdom of heaven coming. So Plato, who was an initiate of those mysteries, and we see that from the 7th letter it's called, is that he becomes... Plato himself was the end of the first beginning of the lighting up of the intellect of this openness space that we are, this knowing space. They were the end of the first beginning. But he still had the echo of the divine, the echo of it, when he was writing his philosophy. That's the only way he could actually be able to do it. Aristotle was cut off from it completely. He was only understanding it in the abstract when he was writing his philosophy. But at the end, the 7th letter articulates that Plato discloses at least the image and likeness of God at the ground of the psyche. Not full-on proper humanistic mysticism, you could call it. But and the 7th letter articulates that pretty convincingly, that he says all his works were naught compared to what has now been disclosed to him, which could be compared to the sort of knowing or gnosis that Jung also experienced, and Also, Thomas Aquinas talks about a similar one at the end of his work, that his works were for naught. All his propositional descriptive works were for naught, based on what... but, of course, Aquinas is different to that, because it's the beatific vision is different to what the pre-Christian people experience. And so Plato, the initiate of those mysteries, presents the doctrine of the basic moral qualities of the friend of wisdom, or philosopher, or lover of wisdom, of Sophia, of Mary Sophia, which is why I've got philosopher on my profile, not in terms of a soidemic, but in terms of the traditional meaning of that word. Lover of wisdom. Wisdom. A true philosopher is a mystic. They all were, ultimately. Even if he wasn't at the start, he was at the end, Plato. And so he shows how the threefold human being must develop the three virtues, and how those virtues completely express their common fruit in external harmony as righteousness. Dikaiosun, I guess you could pronounce that Greek word, is what it's called. Wisdom, Sophia, which the human head must develop, becomes courage in the human heart. Remember what we said about head, heart, and feeling, thinking, willing, head, heart, and limbs. Wisdom, the human head, or the rational soul, you could call it, must develop, becomes courage in the human heart, the sentient soul, and a dominant urge to prudence, sophrison, we've talked about sophrison before, in the limbs, in the will. That's what we're trying to develop with all our practices. So as you become more virtuous, again, not platonically, in terms of monastically, with Christ's help, naturally a sophrison should develop. So it's not so hard. You're not trying to enforce it like a Kantian. As a duty, it becomes a thing you do because you want to. Virtuous behavior, loving all, after practice, but also because Christ helps you. But anyway, a dominant urge to sophrison in the human limbs. But just as the whole human being finds expression in the environment, wisdom, courage, and prudence are revealed together as righteousness. Righteousness is the alignment of wisdom, courage, and prudence. Thus, the harmonization of thinking, head, feeling, heart, willing, limbs, always produces righteousness. It represents the complete soul life of the human being, maintaining a balance between, one, soul life as subject to the spirit, thought, and divine thought. Soul life as subject to the body, the limbs, the will, and soul life itself, feeling. This is ultimately imperfect, though. This is where we're getting to the bacon. It's missing the divine component. This is the harmony that the most eminent representatives of spiritual life have ever worked for, leading up to Christ, with the past and the present, but not the future. What is most essential about how this can be acquired in our time and how important it is on the path of perceptive knowledge is the soul must become free, poised in perfect balance between the senses and the spirit and Christ. This is just what human beings hunger and thirst for once they come into living contact with Christ. The force of the human eye is enabled to display through its union with Christ, and what leads to this harmonizing of soul is the force meant in the Beatitude. Righteousness. Harmony. Harmony is the means and the result, and what leads to the harmony. Christ. Well, who knows how to harmonize your life and you with everyone else? The future knows. Christ knows because he is the future. He knows what to do. He's all potentiality. It's the omega point. He knows. Again, it's a being who incarnated. He knows. Of course, he knows how to harmonize. And this goes even further into judgment itself, which I think this goes into, talking about judgment. Not only, we'll get into that, but this is early harmony. The Platonic harmony is early harmony leading to final harmony and union of upper and lower cross, the empirical self and the transcendent self, and beyond Christ. The future. So before Christ incarnates, before the earth-shattering Sermon on the Mount, before this all occurs, it's really the eternal recurrence. It's really, the Greeks were all about trying to harmonize their being with society, with nature. But really, that's the past and present. But that's as much as they could do then, because Christ hadn't incarnated yet to show the way, the truth, and the life. They had the good, true, and beautiful. But when you hear the good, true, and beautiful, they kind of seem like states. There's something wrong because Christ, God, hasn't incarnated to show the perfect way since the fall. And we're still stuck with the fall. Even though we had the image of likeness of God, at the ground of the psyche, we still were of the imperfect Adam before the new Adam came. Plato's righteousness overcome. True judgment and right includes the future. How true that is. And must. It can't just be episteme. In terms of knowing, it can't just be based on the past and the present and what people have done. I'll be right back. Just got to go to the bathroom. All right. And so, a bit clearer. Where were we? Okay. The satisfying of that striving for harmony of the soul is the very harmony that results when Christ permeates the feeling soul, the sentient soul. He is the future, so can show you what to do in temporality, to harmonize, as I said. The sentient soul represents the condition of the human soul in terms of its whole attitude towards life. The rational soul, the thinking soul, represents what can be added to human life as something specific from within. It is, and these are ways of thinking about it. You know, they're ways of thinking about it. We shouldn't see this as maybe you should see this as a phenomenology rather than a idea superstructure that explains everything, because that's the problem. That's the serpentine problem. The Tower of Babel is these self-sufficient ideological systems that explain everything and don't require the God. We're not systematizing, though there is a degree of systematizing just to understand, to help understand a bit better, but it's a phenomenology, not the thing itself. So if it's the sentient soul that makes it possible for the soul to participate in life, harmoniously or not, it is the rational soul, the thinking soul, that assesses the value of this life and one's participation in it. And this is always a feedback loop. When you're thinking about something, it comes from the feeling soul that's really deep down in the psyche, right? It's this Heideggerian care we were talking about. Your value hierarchy is not something you can program. It's something that's inborn, to do with character, heredity, and it can only actually be changed by Christ because it's so deep down there. It's in your vital body. It's in your unconscious body, your vital unconscious, your psychological unconscious. You can only really change your own habits, but you can't get down to this soul, sentient soul, this feeling soul, which has transvaluated in modernity towards the will to power as time has gone on since Greek times. And Christ ingresses to transform people. This whole thing is about Christ transvaluates your soul in your moving towards him and away from the will to power that we've been programmed with. But you can't change it yourself. You can only do this with him. And so, yes, your judgments come from, you're judging all the time from the thinking soul, the rational soul. You're always judging everything. So when it assesses the value of this life and your participation in it, it's coming from the feeling, from the unconscious already. So you're constantly comparing things with your character and your heredity and the deeper value hierarchy. But in this day and age, that deep layer has been completely warped. So you could say, firstly, you don't have a proper objective conscience, because that's what the whole process of moving towards Christ is about. Discovering objective conscience, so your judgments actually become true. They're not based on your prejudice. So your judgments at the moment, or my judgments were, the moderns' judgments are based on prejudice, even when they think it's based on conscience or something objective. It's always a kind of prejudice, whether it's character, heredity, or the warpings of modernity that have transformed this feeling soul. And so this is all tied up. The reason why we're, of course, going into this is because righteousness is what the Beatitudes talking about. So we have to understand this. And so human experience, this outstanding that we are in the world, what we experience in the world is owed to the feeling soul. Like I said, similar to Heideggerian care. I think I've articulated decently what it is and why it really affects how the world presence is for us. And again, in modernity, that value hierarchy and because of the serpent, was upended towards the will to power, and has seeped back in actually from metaphysics. You could say the renaissance of Greek pre-Christian stuff actually interferes with, and you see that it's a big problem in the West. The interference of the dead technical metaphysics, which leads to the technical being that we now are, actually is a rigid infection. And Heidegger believed that, or Dugan talks about, that communism was the energy left in Greek metaphysics, and capitalism is more like a raw will to power. But still, it comes from a similar sort of thing. And so there's a good reason why the Orthodox Church is very good at, and Valentin Todberg is very good at, de-technicalizing, because it's got getting you away from this will to power that is also tied up with Greek metaphysics. It's a good reason to not be Hellenic. Christ comes to stop this mercenary tearing up of his clothing. If you think about Christ's body as the rawness that he is, and his tunic as the knowing of that, and the clothes above the tunic as what the mercenaries draw lots from, and the Roman soldiers are a symbolic expression of the will to power. They're the ones that stab Christ. They're the ones who scour him, the Roman soldiers. This is the will to power. It's the vinegar that's put up to his mouth. And they draw lots for his tunic. And this is us. That's us and our will to power analyzing being. That's what metaphysics is. It's a rigid logic and cutting up and analyzing that Aristotle represents. And so this cutting up, this Aristotelianism can infect Christianity, and you can end up with a dead legalism. But the legalism of the Pharisees was just as bad too. There's a whole churning, breaking down, which you see in Ecclesiastes in Solomon. You see that. He talks about the eternal recurrence, and you can actually compare his quotes to Nietzsche. It speaks to the age of when things turn into bark rather than looking to the ground and finding him. It's what the intellect tends to do. Anyway, we'll go on. One's response, and so we're on this part here. Human experience in the world is owed to the feeling soul. One's response to experience from within is the work of the rational soul, which is the speaking soul of the human being. It has something of its own to say to our experiences or acquired knowledge. Thus, it rises above mere experience to assess them. Hence, the formation of judgments is the essential activity through which the rational soul expresses itself. Again, in reference to the feeling soul, the value hierarchy. And this thinking, this contemplation, humanistically, is related to the first thing this human did to separate themselves from the stream, which comes from the image and likeness of God, even in pagan times. When altars were first erected, was a lifting out of the stream, and a humanistic lifting out, which is a good thing, as long as it's not overcoming the true thing that comes, which is Christ, eventually. It's the middle ground. We are this in-between. But the in-between, the animal and the divine, must become Christ now. The in-between is the image and likeness, and the old Adam, at least we were able to lift ourselves out of the stream of evolution. To know there was something else going on here, that there was another drive towards the archetype of us that was known to pagans. But the future had not yet come yet. Christ had not yet come to show the way. And so you could consider that being, because as John says, is that nothing was made without the Logos. The image and likeness of God was there. And so that knowing comes from the image of likeness that was still at the ground of people's psyche before Christ came. It's complicated, but it all makes sense once you unpack everything. But that takes a long time. And so the activity of the rational soul, the thinking soul, is not mechanical, but remains in its proper human and moral sphere. At the base of every decision is a verdict. Whether we are conscious of it or not, our rational soul is constantly active and judging. To use the rational soul means to judge, whether we apply the judgment to ourselves, to others, to nature, or to the universe. It's impossible to judge without either ascribing value, which comes from the value hierarchy, to what is judged or withholding it. If a judgment is based on a healthy feeling soul, harmonized to some degree, one's judgment will be just. But that's not the complete picture, as we were about to find out, because of the value hierarchy is sound. But still, it's not enough without Christ. If Christ lives in the feeling soul, the rational soul will be a person. A rational soul in a person of goodwill tends to judge justly or righteously. But of course, you need to be deeply involved in the Christian life for him to dwell. It begins in the feeling soul, but for him to dwell there, that requires a lot of work. If the rational soul, the thinking, you can have Christ thinking too, which we'll get into. If the rational soul itself has absorbed Christ, then something enters the act of judgment that allows the I, the transcendent self, to manifest much more. Thinking itself becomes collaborative. This is amplified because the rational soul, the thinking soul, is more related to that individuality. Because if you go back to Greek times, there is much less I, subjectness. And Christ comes to perfect that as the individual. It's amplified because the thinking soul is more related to that I activity than, again, remember, Christ is the I am that I am. But he's deeper down underneath the I that you are in existence. But its thinking is more related to it than feeling. Thus, something enters judgment that transcends righteousness with Christ. The future, something outside temporality and the eternal recurrence we talk about of the past and present. This is related to Christ's directions of your actions for future happenings, for divine will, outside the duties and rights and this righteousness of the past. Merely just judgment is formed on the basis of past and present, with episteme and doxa. Thinking about how judgments worked in pagan times, even now, because connection to true Christ, people are not even that rational. They're more irrational now. But if you were to follow this sort of Platonic judgment, that merely just judgment is based on past and present. It's based on what one has become under judgment. But kindness and mercy soars above righteousness in the sense that it's not only just to the past and present of the one being judged, but also the individual's future. Because he is the future. He knows the future. But you can only do this with him. Just like episteme. And I'll explain that. We can't know this properly without the Lord, a true just judgment. It does not merely judge on the basis of the past, but also relies on positive future possibilities. And you can't know that as the existentialist. You can't know that as a person that's not connected to Christ, that doesn't receive conscience from Christ. Objective conscience means you're connected with the future. It means you're connected with objective morality as well, not historical morality, which is what it is without Christ. Out of kindness, these real future possibilities intuited from him. And they're out of kindness. These are also taken into consideration in the judgment. So if you're a judge, you're applying doxa and dianoia, you're applying concentration, you're gathering all the facts of things, but also you should be adding, judges are supposed to be special people, and they're not now, right? They're really not. Then you're supposed to include episteme, which is a holistic understanding. We've talked about before what episteme is. It's a faculty of understanding that when you go back further in time, philosophers had. It's something that it's not just a collection of facts. It's a holistic knowing, a spiritual knowing, but it only includes the past and the present, right? And so judges are already even failing at that. But you can get a sense when you look back at old court documents that these people were more special people. But the point of true judgment is supposed to include these deeper faculties of knowing, not just things read out of a book. And so episteme is one of them. But without Christ, it's missing a thing, which is intuition. I don't mean women's intuition. I mean the developed faculty of communication with Christ and objective conscience. And so what does that add? It adds mercy. It adds a sense of that a true judgment, really to be just, has to include an understanding of what that person could be. Not just a guess based on what you know of the past and present, but to include Christ in the judgment of the person in court. And how do you do that? Well, you have to be a really deep Christian to be influenced by Christ and his knowings, which are beyond you, which means if you are in communication with him to some degree, even just with intuitions, then the future is involving itself in the decision making, not just the past and present that Plato talked of in his. And really, a true just judgment can't be made without the Lord. And so that's certainly, don't you see this in the degeneration of the courts? Truly, You cannot have a jury system. You cannot have a fair system that doesn't have a value hierarchy, this feeling soul that's connected to Christ, because it's not really true. It's what then Heidegger describes as the good being historical. Without the connection to the divine being, there is no truth. The postmodernists are right about that. And so when people talk about woke right, woke and woke left, it's a complete misunderstanding, because liberalism, of course, there's no objective truth for any of these ways of thinking. But what we do as is completely different to woke. A woke person is, or a woke postmodernist, is they take the will to power to be all that matters, right? So they'll use any means of, because all historical phenomena is just who was powerful at the time, or who has the means of production and the resources of production. They'll just use anything to excite, anything that they can use to excite, to win, to excite forces of the psyche, is what's true. It's kind of Nietzschean in a way. And so what's powerful is what's true. But we don't do that. I mean, some Nietzschean postmodernists might, but we don't. A traditionalist knows this truth is a being outside of temporality. Yes, human truth, there's no such thing unless it's connected to the Lord. Unless you have these other faculties. Other than that, though, postmodernism is right of unanchored humanity. It's right about that. So anyway, that's a long story. We're digressing a bit by about what we're talking about. And so, in this sense, kindness or mercy is more righteous than simple righteousness, because it also considers the future. When kindness judges the rational soul, the thinking soul, it judges according to the new law proclaimed in the Sermon on the Mount, the law of providence, the law of true future, the law of the kingdom of God being at hand. It transcends the Platonic ideal, the pagan ideal of righteousness, and grows gradually into a new type of judgment, one in harmony with the spirit of the New Testament. Providence has come. He's come finally. Finally, after the long preparation. The result of such judgment is that the karmic judgment of the one who is judging becomes kind as well. And those who judge others not only for what they have become, but also what they are becoming, create a reason why they should be judged in like manner by others. We should consider this every time we're tempted to write someone off and judge them. Always tend to say about people, really, this is a good rule of thumb, is that they act evilly. They're acting evilly, rather than they are evil. Because they have an image of likeness of God, they're essentially not. But their likeness is they're habituating and acting evil. Because what could their future be? Of course, we need to develop a deep enough contact with the Lord so you can ask. Because some people, it doesn't mean you don't avoid evil, doesn't mean you fight evil. But if he's there, he can be a part of that judgment. That's why you pray for those people. That doesn't mean some toxic empathy or sympathy and never making judgments. Of course not. It just means Christ needs to actually come in the equation. Because the problem with all these things is about the empirical self. Going to war and doing all these decisions that lead to such violence and stuff is really not to be made by the empirical self. The empirical self has all these feeling soul desires that are low and corrupted. It needs to be made. The decisions have to be made. Crusades, whatever. These things have to be made sometimes, right? Christians, the idea that we don't defend ourselves, no. It's just you can't make a war because of a desire of the empirical self. It has to be something that's divine will. Not because of the low gods of existence. That's what that stuff all is about. And so, of course, Christians are to defend themselves. But it can't be about what you want. It's about what the Lord wants. And so, it means for those who have the faculties to commune with the Lord in this way to include him and be watchful so he can also enter all thought, not merely with the will and feeling. And that's not to say either that a thinking that's warm is not exact and concise, which we'll get to, because there's a misunderstanding of what primordial concepts are and primordial thinking is and what we actually have to return to. There's a sense that people think that that's woolly or it becomes woolly. There couldn't be nothing further from the truth. So the restoration of health, the harmonization of human social relationships is the result of absorbing Christ, or him joining you is a better way of thinking about it, in the thinking soul. Just as harmonizing the inner soul is a result of his absorption into the feeling soul. These things happen in the process, in mysticism, in monasticism, in Christian initiation. This is a thing that slowly happens. He transforms what you love as theosis. It's a transformation of these three things that we're articulating as separate for the help of understanding how these things happen. But it's not just a matter of feeling, it enters thought too, and willing. And all sorts of transformations begin to happen as you become close to him. Anyway, next slide. And so, blessed are they that hunger and thirst for righteousness. This thirsting of the soul can't be satisfied by anything in existence. Liberalism, communism, industrialism's the problem, the making of the human into a number on a page to be exploited as an extension of a machine. Doesn't matter what political theory you have, doesn't matter what you do, it can't be satisfied by a political theory. It can't be satisfied by an eye for an eye. It can't be satisfied by the things here in facticity. And so it doesn't matter if the means of production are owned by the state or private individuals. So righteousness, that is freedom and equality, remains an illusion when sought within the realm of natural evolution. With its extension in human history, it's simply not to be found there and never can be, because the struggle for survival translated from natural evolution to the arena of history has nothing to do with righteousness. Perfect equality and freedom can actually be experienced when people from all stations of life, rich or poor, young and old, kneel at Holy Communion during the divine liturgy. They are all equal in the divine presence, and in the knowledge of their own imperfections, and in their profession of the divine perfection that is Jesus Christ. Righteousness holds sway, and the hunger and thirst for righteousness is stilled. What is of earth alone within the stream of natural evolution cannot still this hunger or thirst, for righteousness is a state where the soul experiences the presence of the transcendent, the super-earthly, the heavenly. Blessed are they that hunger and thirst after righteousness. Righteousness, for they shall be filled, proclaims the Sermon on the Mount. What is meant here is not an unrealizable terrestrial equality and freedom, as you see even in this social teaching, in and this is what you see with communism when you try to turn Christianity into an idea superstructure, when you try to apply it as a value, as a concept, with grey race communism, with no, there's nothing on earth that can do this. But it's the equality and freedom of the state of consciousness designated as the kingdom of heaven in the Sermon on the Mount. The kingdom of heaven comes here in communion with God. The stilling of this hunger and thirst for righteousness does not entail terrestrial compensation, but participation in the existential state where there is no unrighteousness. Sermon on the Mount expresses it. Blessed are they that are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The fact of their persecution for righteousness' sake is manifestly something unrighteousness that befalls them in earthly life, but the share in the kingdom of heaven they attain thereby reduces such unrighteousness to nothing. Of course, the Lord helps you in affairs in reality, but this is forgiveness. This is being released of. Part of it is being released of the provokings of your own resentments towards other people because of this righteousness we're talking about, because of when people have wronged you, being released from that, because in a way your enemies provoke you, as we've talked about many times before. You're possessed by your righteousness and dislike of how you see unfairness. And this is compensated for by your closeness to God. So hungering and searching and thirsting after righteousness towards the Lord leads you to become one of the blessed, in which you get to communicate with God and be closer to God. Of course, with everything else that it is involved in initiation, but this is what it's expressing here. And so, yeah, that's what it's talking about. And as you can see there, that's a condition of soul. It's that transforms. So, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. You can see how that's related to what we talked about there with justice. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Purification of the heart is part of this transformation, but the 4th, 5th, and 6th Beatitude are talking about. And so the 5th verse of the Beatitude expresses these fundamental truths concerning the inner conversion of the rational soul under the influence of Christ and its results. Blessed are the merciful, they shall obtain mercy. Although the Christ-filled intellectual soul, rational soul becomes the thinking soul, becomes a soul of mercy, a soul of future, of potentiality, of what can be in Christ. But also knowing, again, faculties come alive because you are interacting with the future. It's nevertheless difficult for today's consciousness to comprehend the idea of a merciful intellect, or an intellect filled with the warmth of feeling and Christ's will and Christ's feeling, right? Having entered all these different parts of the soul. But it's true. It's experience teaches that the very idea of shrewd intellect carries an unsympathetic, not caring, this rational, liberal referee, this scientific referee. Really, that's a cynicism. This whole process leads to an objective love of all, including nature and how it is, a love of the sun and how it moves, and light and all of nature. It's a deep love of all, not a deep removal to study dead legalism and dead laws of the will to power. It's really a demon scientific, science as a worldview anyway. Science is fine and powerful as a method, that's fine. But as a worldview, it's a demon. And then on the other side is the angel. So it's objective cynicism, objective love. And with that objective love, you also gain the truth of the faculties, right? So it's not something that's just a feeling state. No, you actually have contact with truth, the divine being, which means that you can ask what's true, that you have intuitions of what's true, greater than what experiment and rationality and logic can provide. That's only a certain type of certainty. The certainties that we're talking about are deeper than. As you know, we know the saints have special faculties. And this is what the pure of heart's also talking about. Saints have special faculties when they've purified themselves nature, which is decadent humanity, doesn't attack them. The birds come to them. Some of them have that, which is what will happen in the future. Nature will have morality, true objective morality through us, who is the in-between, ingress into it, and will no longer be this war of all against all. Because we know that nature has another principle in it, cooperation. Cooperation will win out. Not through some hegemonic technical impression like those foolish plan B or game B people talk about. No, Christ, God, not some silly Jew. Yeah, let's just not say that word. Anyway, Weinstein. The three Weinstein brothers. The one that's in jail and the two others who are continuing their grift. Anyway. Funny. I don't know if anyone saw him on Piers Morgan. It was quite a spectacle. Okay. So, experience teaches us that the very idea of shrewd intellect carries an unsympathetic lack of consideration and intrinsic cruelty in the formation of judgments. Even if we rid ourselves of the thought of hardness and coldness of intellect, however, it's difficult to imagine anything positive in a soft, warm intellect. In any case, it's certainly not easy to think of such an intellect as sharp. The results of softening the intellect always seem to be vagueness and subjectivity in forming judgments, but that is not true at all of what we're talking about here. It's the opposite. The way, the truth doesn't exist without the way in life. But it is more clear because when it's united with these things, it's not subjective. When it becomes objective, nevertheless, it's possible to judge with perfectly clear concepts that are clear and warm as sunlight. Clear thought, full of life and morality, true truth and thought belongs with the way and life, with feeling. Primordially true concepts are like the commandments that carry and carried for the Israelites an intrinsic power and beauty. When they were said back then, they had will and feeling. Shudder, it's something that when they're said, they had an effect on the blood and which happens again when Christ comes within, is that he affects your body and your blood and through these different things that become awake. But that's how it was back then. There wasn't this spurg, abstracted, ripped apart by mercenaries being in the will to power. And the reason it's become abstracted, if you just think about this for a reason, we're not in contact with reality and partly because you say you've got the raw fact of being, speed equals distance over time. There's only movement, but then you learn physics and the equation, and time, the concept, then enters. Time and distance then enter as concepts, and they become things that give form to how reality is then. Same with Eisenstein's equations, thinking about relativity. They actually separate you from reality. It's not that they don't have truths in them, of course, but they enter a worldview. A worldview enters, a concept then enters and starts giving form, spurg, abstractly, falsely, actually. Even though it's true of some things of reality, because it informs a total worldview, the concepts we learn as we come up actually really badly infect and turn us into an abstract soul, unfortunately. And so you have to get at, through the depth practices, the essence of being. Otherwise, you are ripped away from reality, which we are. Modernity, we know, is. And so, like I said about the primordially true concepts, to show this as a potential social fact to the world is the task and intellectual and depth Christianity of what we have to do. to those who seek to redeem thinking and unite it with the Spirit. This stuff makes perfect sense. It's not that you shut off the intellect. It's that you redeem it. It's not that you fundamentally, the Logos is sense making, the true sense making. He makes sense. But the people that are under the illusion don't have the deeper knowings that are required. But those deeper faculties also align with and help inform and give the joining higher order concepts that make it all make sense. There will be consistency to that, not as an ideological superstructure, but the trouble is you get these self-referential idea superstructures and ideologies of how reality is self-referential, and they seem perfect, they're internally consistent. But there's a higher order higher order domains they don't properly map. And so when you have when these higher faculties are developed, you can see the connections between different ideas and then articulate them, say, symbolically or whatnot, to show how they fit together. It all makes sense. The point is, it makes sense because fundamentally the Lord reveals truth through your relationship with him. And those higher order things that transcend perhaps inconsistencies one might see in those gaps are filled in basically by your connection to the divine being, but articulated in thought. It's just that we don't see it from our perspective. But you also have it on the depth levels of certainty, not just rationalistic certainty, not just Aristotelian logic certainty of the intellect, but on deeper levels. But it also makes sense too. But you have to go through the process for that to happen. You have to have access to the gift of black perfection. You have to have access to divine wisdom itself. Also helps with that. But also you got to be careful with the intellect, because a lot of people have trouble when you get involved with the legalism of making every theology and making this it all work out, match up as a system. It's supposed to really, the best thing, and what's so good about Heidegger is he dissolves the certainty of that, of the idea superstructure. That's really a preparation of what should happen, because you really a true theology should get you prepared to coming close to him as a fact of experience, as the beings. As we know, metaphysics is a deduction from observing reality, deducing the laws behind it as propositions, whereas Hermetic philosophy or mystic philosophy or true theology really is looking to the essence of things to get to the beings themselves, not just abstract laws from them. It's to see and to one. It's like a phenomenology. It's a depth phenomenology. It's getting to the beings themselves and then articulating what that relationship is like and its connections. But it doesn't work without mysticism. Anyway, I've talked about that before. So that's a big task, to unite the intellect and the spirit and to show how it does happen. And its purpose, though, is to practically get people to traditionalism, all this stuff, Hermeticism, whatever it is, esoteric Christianity, even theology and Christianity. Its task, really, speaking intellectually about these things, is to try get people to the mystic depths, is to try get people to do the practice, to unlock it, to get out of the capture of principalities and powers, to get out of the capture of ideological systems that have given people a false certainty, the magic spell of modernity. But it has to be practical. It has to be the practice to make this transformation of the soul that this is talking about. You have to find he who is through practice. You can't just sit pontificating, looking at historical documents, writing new articles, trying to make money on Substack, whatever it is. You have to do this, even if it leads to a poverty of spirit, a poverty financially. We should be single-mindedly working towards disclosing he who is and his will for us. If we want to solve the problems that people are having, people don't want to do that though. They're tied up with the will to power. They're tied up with continuing the polemical battle, but they need desperately to find him in the mystic depths, in hesychism. And so, if it's difficult to form an idea of a rational soul that has absorbed Christ, or Christ has come to dwell in, is a better way of putting it, it is even more difficult to imagine a consciousness soul, or the soul, the will, the limb soul, which is how basically what we exist in now. But it's worse than just the consciousness soul that we exist in now, how the world presents it to us. It's an abstract soul, like I said. But it's even more difficult to understand that presencing, that modern presencing of being and how it looks to us, the consciousness soul that shows the influence of Christ. The wedding, the celebration, entering your consciousness. It's quite difficult to imagine. Of course, it's the grand mystery, and that in a way that's good because it can't be mapped by the intellect. The true mystery only deepens and deepens. The true mystery only continues to humble and humble as the unseen sun rises, bearing the quicksilver and warmth, the cool quicksilver, I should say, of the eternal. Anyway, I'm just trying to repeat a tweet that I wrote, but I can't remember the full tweet. But the point is, it just gets deeper and deeper, the mystery. And so this process also maps on purification and illumination and union, a purification of the will, thought, and feeling. And so when we're talking about Christ entering the consciousness soul, or the willing soul, the limb soul, you could call it, it's about him, grace being available and with you, but also union and interaction. It's walking with God. So it's the total transformation is articulated in that. The way being is for you is changed forever, and that's what you have to look forward to. If you just have to put the time in, though. You have to put the time in. It's possible for everyone to do. Concentration without effort in prayer. And so life today gives us a picture of the inartistic, amoral, and materialistic consciousness being and the way it presences, as we've talked about many times before, that dominates materialistic science and the arts and postmodernism, which is a complete dissolution of all value and subjectivizing of everything, it goes further than the materialism that's mentioned here. Can the objectivity and pragmatism of today's consciousness become creativity, morality, and spirituality? True, though, not the danger of the false spirituality that's now rising as the true danger. It's as the satanic religion of the future. Again, it's not just materialism. That's half the problem. There's the new problem, which is the false spirituality. And this is the question that arises from the present condition of human consciousness, the postmodern condition. The transformation that is needed is the consciousness soul through Christ, is to change from the consciousness soul into the conscience soul, moral unity with Christ, and being informed by objective conscience through intuition, or even united. So everything you do is connected with the ground of moral reality. just as the feeling soul is changed to a righteousness soul in harmony. So guided from the future as conscience is the whole consciousness transformed, just as righteousness soul is brought into harmony, made into the righteousness soul from what it was before, unrighteousness soul. Really, this is a transformation of the non-likeness into a likeness. And the thinking soul becomes a merciful soul, and concepts and thought is imbued with thought, feeling, and the will. And when those people talk, the spirit, which is a part of the mission of the West, is to talk again in this threefold transformation that the three Beatitudes in the middle describe, is that speech needs to be ingressed with the true spirit and to reach other people, which is being pulled out of all Western speech as it became and becomes technicalized. And so the consciousness soul must become a conscience soul, not just in personal sense of right and wrong, but especially in the sense of taking a conscious and conscientiousness responsibility to humanity and nature. This is the transformation that occurs through the loving of all. You have to love nature, the hierarchies, the saints. Pray for it. Charity. Love of neighbor, love of nature, love of the Lord and the Mother, Mary, love of hierarchies and the saints. Yeah, that's all of them, those four. Only through that do you become this angelic objectivity with the faculties of angelic objectivity and contact with truth that you can follow. That's more, it's greater than anything, greater than any AI will ever give you these answers, is to be guided by the Lord and divine will. Because the utilitarian, dead, demonic objectivity, which is actually going to be subjectivized more and more through the religion of the future and the falseness of the prophetic AI and that's coming, and the religion of the future being LSD and those sorts of drugs and Easternism. As that comes more and more, people need to be deeply transformed by Christ to notice those people, to point them out, but also to notice people that aren't of that. Both, to have a true discernment. And this is what all we're talking about with all of this is what Paul says. It's not I who lives, but Christ who lives and acts in me. It's all just a going into detail to show how they're related to the Beatitudes and the different and articulating it and splitting it up a bit phenomenologically to get a sense of how the different parts are transformed, how the different experiences of feeling, thought, and will are transformed in the process. So you've got to be careful not to always consider this stuff constituents, not parts. And don't let it become an idea superstructure that holds you from Christ. So that's what we're after. That's what this is all about. Paul's state, St. Paul's state. The objectivity and pragmatism of the consciousness soul must be maintained, but it will become the bearer of outwardly projected Christ. And that means forward thrown into nature is what that means. Into the ground of nature till it becomes obedient to heaven. That's the kingdom of heaven coming to earth. This is really about also the becoming also pure of heart, becoming angelic objective. Again, this is deep in the future, though, that nature begins to obey because, of course, it's the perfection of all humanity, and nature is fallen humanity. Nature is decadent humanity from the fall. It's going to take a long time for this to occur, but that eventually will happen. You see this in some of the saints, our very best, in the faculties they had with animals, being obedient to them. That one day, and the apostles, that one day will be all of nature obeying the cooperative principle and the ingression from the future through us who are the in-between, who have to, and you do this yourself, in the same way we have to ennoble nature we have to first do it within, which is the whole what the Beatitudes are about. You can't go around as an environmentalist trying to do this BS when you're this deeply corrupted, filthy, sodomous human being. You're going to go tell nature what to do. That's why nature's not obedient to you, because you're corrupt at your base. And why it is obedient to a saint. First, the kingdom of heaven can come. The kingdom of heaven has come, is at hand. It's already happened because Christ came. You just have to purify yourself to see the kingdom. Those who are pure in heart will see God. We do it first, then eventually it ingresses into nature. But you have to do it first before you try to do anything with objective nature itself. You have to do it in your own heart. It's pointless doing it the other way around, as environmentalists are. You can do it to a certain degree, but in terms of nature doesn't trust us. Nature doesn't trust us. It's ruled by two principles for all it knows, the dark and the light. But it takes us showing it and ennobling it. But you have to ennoble your lower animal self, the lower cross that you bear, your empirical self. We're not Buddhists. We're not Indians. We don't suicide the lower self for the transcendent self. We don't abandon being. We don't depersonalize, which is what their practices do. We ennoble it. The likeness is to be with the image, not abandoned. Nature is to be ennobled because Christ came. We're here to save. Our solution isn't a medication to flee an imperfect world. Our solution is the treatment of, no, it can be treated because Christ treated it. He's already done it in the macrocosm. So, yeah. Nature has been placed in the service of humankind by extending knowledge over the world, but by extending conscience into the essence of the natural world. Human beings will one day become conscious servants of, and this is will to service. This is because Christ and the angeloi serve us. They wash our feet. We too first wash our animal selves and ennoble it with Christ's help, of course, always collaborative. You can't do anything without him. So too one day the rest of nature will be washed by us with Christ. Human beings will become nature's servants in the sense they will try to give it a necessary moral and spiritual element, just as nature provides a humankind. Again, this doesn't mean, the environmentalism of today. These people are all imperfect. It has to happen to us first. But it's just basically, we're articulating here this pure of heart and seeing to the essence of nature is possible if you love nature as well. But you have to love the Lord and love hierarchies and love your fellow man first. But yeah, conscientious responsibility towards the natural realm results from the deeper knowledge of nature. Natural facts are accurately and exhaustively investigated, and the consequences of the fall of humanity are being investigated in like manner. And that will become more clear as as science eventually will probably start to discover what the tradition has already known eventually. They cannot help but stumble upon the fact of the fall of humanity and the sum total of natural phenomena. Eventually they'll come to see what we know. Just as the law of gravity was once discovered, the law of the fall will also be discovered, probably. That is the fact that nature as a whole is really decadent humanity. As we're talking about, as a result of this discovery, nature will present the claim that human beings will turn their hearts towards the natural world. But again, the perfection must come here first. Then the great catharsis, this is just talking of the future, then the great catharsis, purification of heart, will take place. It's all with Christ. Human hearts will be turned outward, since purification of the heart means that it will no longer be cramped within itself, but opened to the world. Once the law of the fall of nature becomes a subject of consciousness, it will gain a clear picture of the undivided being that is now broken and decadent in nature. And this is to seeing how creation works fundamentally. That's what's possible you could think about this as the day path of St. Bonaventura, seeing God in the essence, in the presencing of nature, seeing the angeloi acting through as the final cause seeing how the creation is moved at its ground. This becomes possible for saints to be able to see. And in this process, looking to the essence of things, Steiner was able to, so was Valentin Tomberg, to see these, again, like we've talked about before. Christian Hermeticism looks to the essence of things. Eventually, that faculty becomes possible through love. Intuition fundamentally is through love, and you have to love nature to look to its essence. Goethe, the great philosopher, awakened that faculty in himself too. But he was missing other things, but that becomes possible for people through loving, not yourself, because the essence of all reality is love. And so you can, if you have the permission of the thing you're looking to see the essence of and the beings that operate in it, through love, through intuition, the Lord moves you, and the Lord knows you at the same time. He looks to your essence, you look to his. And the same for the beings of the world. So that's what eventually becomes possible. But we're not so concerned with this. We're mostly concerned with the Lord and the angeloi and relationship to the Lord, basically, and Mary. That's what we're concerned with. But these things do become possible. For people like Goethe that are so interested in seeing to nature. And St. Bonaventura is a good example, his day path to seeing the Lord behind all of creation. But what we want is a synthesis of the day path and the night path, the St. John of the Cross and St. Bonaventura, because you need that negative theology. You need to get outside of the creation and what brings it about to the essence of the self. And so going through that St. Bonaventura path, you get a clear picture of the undivided being that is now broken and decadent in nature, this archetypal human being who contains the whole nature, the old Adam of the tradition and the image and likeness of God, who is now the desire of all creation to move towards, will arise in consciousness from the vision of fallen nature. The pure in heart, those whose hearts have turned towards the realm of fallen nature, after you've gone through this whole process, see God in that image. See God, the ideal archetype behind the creation. But again, it's not the mystic path is disclosure of beyond the image and likeness. In that image, God will indeed be visible to human beings who have purified their hearts by contemplating the tragic distortion of that image, the likeness. What does that mean? It means by acknowledging the truth about yourself. But this is Tomberg here. He's talking about nature is a distortion. So objectively, nature is like the likeness. We've distorted our individual likeness. Nature is a distortion of its own image too, of Adam. Nature is all fallen Adam. And so in the sixth beatitude, we are told, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. It's not a matter of seeing the cosmic Father God, but one of seeing the divine in the day path. The divine archetype of humanity, visible in the elemental world as the hope of nature's resurrection in the age of consciousness soul, in the observation of nature. Again, we're talking about in the mystic, of course, it's talking about Christ. But in this, it's not saying you're seeing essence. It's saying the ground of nature. I don't think I want to go into any more detail of that. And so blessed are they that are persecuted for my sake. That might be the next one. Hang on. Blessed are the merciful, for they are shown mercy. I'll just see how long we've gone for, and let me just look. Well, no, we'll finish this off. All right. So this Blessed are they that are persecuted for my sake. We're just doing the middle three, but this is related to the middle three. The compensatory balance lies in the vertical earth and heaven axis and not along the horizontal axis of terrestrial events. This is showing what happens to those that are persecuted is related to righteousness and what's given to us in response to that. And so it's the reward in heaven that illumines from above the unrighteousness endured in the current of evolution, driving it away like a shadow before the light. The compensatory balance in the sense of vertical or divine righteousness consists in the reward in heaven, that is, in the enrichment of humanity's being and not in the punishment of the perpetrator of unrighteousness, in accordance with the principle of horizontal justice, which the Old Testament, eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, that also links to karma and all the other. When we talk about the eternal recurrence, there are all a list of all other types of determinism that is overcome by the kingdom of heaven. That could be astrological, hereditary, characterological. All these different things are necessities that push. They compel, they impel, but they don't. You have a choice because of Christ. But all these factors are pushing on you. The planets have an effect on you. The archetypes, as Jung talked about. And so those are all of the past, though. They're all determinisms. They're all of eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And so the righteousness of the kingdom of God differs from that expressed in the law of karma or destiny or necessity, this push from the past into the future, this push from what has been to bring about what is based on the past and not on the true future as Christ. These are the gods of existence as well. They are from the past. Just like when I talk about Landian idea of AI assembling itself out of the future. No, it's out of the fake future. It's spiritual necessity from the past, the gods of existence from the fall, pushing to bring about what they want, and not from the eternal, the true future. And so the righteousness of karma, though, of the past signifies a compensatory balance taking place at some time within the terrestrial events, though, not with divine contact. It corresponds to the same principle of eye for an eye, of tooth for a tooth, but in the way of atonement. Like something in reincarnation, the idea that they will atone for their sin against you later on in the far future, rather than punishment. Because the idea of karma is essentially humanistic in that it is conscience-oriented. It's not to do with contact with heaven. The one who commits an unjust act against another searches for an opportunity, like I said, in the future to make good on the offense. The human conscience hungers and thirsts for such a law, one of atonement rather than a punishment. It's essentially this law of conscience that operates in destiny. Karmic determinism is to be distinguished both from astrological determinism, the movement of the stars as deterministic factors in destiny, and from biological determinism, heredity as the determining factor of destiny, and that factors pertaining to conscience, prenatal factors, preside over the choice both of heredity and birth horoscope. These are just like these things, esoteric things operating. The point is Christ overcomes all of this because he is the future. These are all these things, the pushes of the past, trying to influence human beings. And for this reason, the concept, the idea, and the ideal of destiny or karma belong to the loftier moral plane than the legal concept of righteousness as retribution on the part of an external power. They are of the unconscious, karma is. It's of the temporal will, the collective unconscious. It's of temporality. It is unconscious, though. It's not eternal, though. It's not outside. It's not divine. But things operate there. Your sin operates there. You can't see it. But it's still a determinism. Again, as we talked about when we talked about Christ's miracles, he overcomes all that. Overcomes heredity, destiny. He overcomes the hereditary sin of the nobleman's son and the effects of the father on the son. He overcomes with the different miracles of the healings. So all these effects are overcome by Christ. So those things do surpass the retributive justice, but so too does the law of righteousness of the kingdom of God, surpasses the humanistic in between, and surpasses also the animal, which is what occurs in one life, what occurs in facticity, retributive, as expressed in the Sermon on the Mount. For the latter is operative in the highest and most essential region of all. It heals the wounds of the heart suffered at the hands of injustice and transforms the pain of unjustly inflicted suffering into everlasting bliss. The peace of the heart to divine communion, but also faculties and help in reality. But the point being, you're released of the resentment, you're released of the darkness. Because when someone does something to you, you actually also are perverted by their attack on you, unfortunately. But that's why the Lord came. And what it does is it leaves the offenders to the tribunal of their own conscience, and after death, what happens to them when they'll be judged? They'll have to face God. But it doesn't inflict punishment here and now on them because of freedom. Thus does the righteousness of the kingdom of God transcend both righteousness of retribution and that of atonement and karma. He is the king of karma, the king of everything, king of death. He overcomes everything. It's sort of expressing here how the Eastern ideas are all overcome by Christ, and that it is a bountiful and merciful righteousness that bestows gifts of eternal value, in whose light the shadows cast through suffering and injustice disappear. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the earth. The meek, anyway. Blessed are the merciful, all those who desire, that is, actually make the effort to practice a morality transcending retribution and atonement, will have their place in the kingdom of God and his righteousness. Hence, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. That the actual application of the will, its concrete engagement in the practice of merciful righteousness, is a necessary precondition of partaking of the benefaction of this righteousness, is evident not only from the Beatitudes cited, but also from the words that follow immediately on. The Lord's Prayer, which provide a kind of commentary on the fifth petition, forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. We refer to the words, for if ye forgive men their debts, your heavenly Father also will forgive you. But if you do not forgive men their debts, neither will your Father forgive your debts. You're forgiven your debts, you're released from the unrighteousness, so you can become like God. So you can, the non-likeness that you have become from the different things that have been done to you, but also the happenstance of the will to power and the things that you've been brought up with and the lusty desires you've emerged with. You have the opportunity to be released of all that and all your sin to move towards God, for the likeness that you are as the empirical subject, to be ennobled to become the likeness of God, not abandoned and cut off like the Easterners, and not the will to power embrace. And what happens with those who embrace will to power? Well, they cut off the other opposite. They cut off the transcendent self and go mad like Nietzsche through megalomania or inferiority complex. And so the East cuts off the empirical self in depersonalization, and the will to power West, or the satanic versus the Luciferic, basically, cuts off the transcendent self and embraces the will to power and goes with the subterranean forces. There is no truth, only power. And so the middle way, the narrow way, is You're not abandoning our earthly mission. No. The world is sick and it can be cured. Christ has cured it. And the only way to cure yourself is to walk towards Christ. It is thus not the will for the good, favour, and benefaction of merciful righteousness that makes one a partaker of that, but the will for the kingdom of God and his righteousness in itself. Will that is put into actual practice, obedience. Lord, let it be with me according to your word and will. Let your kingdom come, not my will, your will. Say it, pray to him. Pray for that state to be brought about in you. Obviously, you obey in your actions and you purify your actions, but also pray for it. Pray for faith, hope, and charity. Pray for it to be his will. Your will, Lord, not my will. Your will be done, not my will. Until my will becomes your will. And there's a truth in that. What does it say? As above, so below, for the divine thing to happen. That's what it means, really. It's to actually see the above and partake in the above. You have to become you have to become him. Yeah, it's theosis. It's pointing to. Anyway, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all else shall be added onto you. He keeps his promises. And forgiving a debt is not for favor. None of this is for favor or gain. It's to become his will. It's not something to do to bring about an outcome. You just have to do it, which is what the whole practice is always about, concentration without effort. It's getting out of this will to power mindset where you do something and it brings about a technical outcome. You just do. You don't try, you do. You pray, you do. And the transformation, you pray for the transformation. You pray for faith, hope, and charity. And a deep transformation of your being slowly occurs if you are willing to give the time and put the hour in and do what needs to be done and enact all the different practices related to the three monastic oaths of obedience, poverty, and chastity. My friends, that's the end of our lecture. We've done then the middle Beatitudes. And so I'll see if there's any questions or if anyone's asked anything. But we will then go over to the Discord, and I'll happily chat and see if you've my friends. Anything. That's the end of our lecture. Hello, Nord Hugo, my friend. Thanks for your message. I hope all is going well for you. All right, everyone. How long have we gone for there? I'm not sure. Wait, let me look. It looks like it's gone for. Oh yeah, that was a long one. I'm going to try keep these to an hour and a half, but that's good. All right, I hope that was helpful, everyone. I'll see you guys over in the Discord. God bless you. I hope that was that was good. I'll see you next time. Oh wait, one more thing. I should have said this at the start. Please help us continue the new program we've got in store, and also to continue these lectures, because this is only temporary that I can keep doing these. And what I'm currently using, like I said, my laptop imploded, so I need help to be able to continue it. If you could go to the link that I've got, it'll be pinned in the description as well, and on my Twitter, and donate. I'd be greatly appreciative that we can keep doing. All right, everyone. God bless you. I'll see you in the Discord. For those who and you can, if you want to continue a chat in the Discord, you can sign up at scottmanion.com/fellowship or on Substack, and the links there's a link on my website there for that too if you want to take part in the conversation.